I'll get more into the philosophy of design later, but anybody can invent a solution to a problem if the problem is defined clearly enough. But the art of it is in solving it simply.
Welcome to Going In Blind. I'm your host, Zach Tidwell, and today I'm speaking with founder of Creating Ability, Kevin Carr. And to everyone at home, thank you for listening. Please take a second to help me grow the show so that I can keep delivering these conversations week after week for years to come. Subscribe, rate, and review the show in whatever podcasting app you're using right now, and check out the show notes to follow me on social media and YouTube as well. When you share your favorite episodes, tag me and use the hashtag GoingInBlind. You can also join my mailing list at zachtidwell.net. And if you know someone you think I should talk to, have them send me an email at contact.goinginblind@gmail.com. Kevin, welcome to Going In Blind.
Zach, thanks for having me. I appreciate being here.
Yeah, thanks for making it work. I know you don't typically do interviews, but if people haven't already heard episode one, you came up while I was talking to Joe Mornini. And as soon as, I don't know how, because I've known Joe for a couple of years, but as soon as he mentioned what you were doing, I was like, I got to talk to this guy.
Cool. I
But
was so proud of Joe because he actually got my company name right for like the first time in 20 years.
he's
So
he's got a lot crammed in his noggin.
he
So
does. We have a running joke between us because we've worked together for 20 years. And he calls my company Creating Abilities. So I call his team River Runners. And we egg each other on with it now. So I was really impressed that he was cool and said the right name.
yeah,
So now that I've confused everybody.
he must have drank an extra Ensure that day or something to make sure to make sure he was sharp.
He
So
wasn't under pressure.
to give everybody
Mm.
a little context, I'll remind them Joe Mornini is the co-founder and executive director of Team River Runner. And again, I spoke with him in episode one, but you are Kevin Carr and the founder of Creating Ability. And I would like, if you're fine with it, maybe if you can explain a little bit about your company and what you do, but after that, I'd like to dive into more of the story and other things that came up in my research into you that I'd like to talk to you about, and we'll just see where it goes.
Oh, that sounds downright terrifying. Oh, so yeah, that's great. Creating Ability is a tiny company. We have three full-time employees, one of which is my son, Trevor. Uh, we have one part-time person doing some sewing. My wife did all the sewing for 20 years. So we're tiny. We're in a small town in Minnesota with one stoplight and a grain elevator, about 2,000 people. So am in the glorious position of walking, driving, or biking to work in about the same time. We build and design adaptive kayaking equipment is the core of the business. It's kind of where we've come from and who we are after 20 years. But we're also adding new devices that get more into cycling and sled hockey, and basically any place where it's difficult to get out of a wheelchair and into whatever it is you're going to do for fun. We build everything. We have some product that gets manufactured. Some machining is done for us outside of the plant. Some plastic molding gets done over in Wisconsin, but it's all built in Minnesota. I only know of one piece of anything that we do that comes from China. So
What is that piece?
it's the big balloon wheels on the chariot that rolls the
Oh,
kayak
okay.
around. I can't find a domestic equivalent, so I'm stuck with it for now.
One giant piece.
Yeah, exactly. The biggest piece we do just happens to say "Made in China" all over the side of it. So that's kind of the really way back view in a nutshell, the Reader's Digest version.
I'm always curious. Typically I get to ask this question if I'm on a ski lift or if I'm kayaking with somebody who's new, or I go rock climbing or any other random venture that I get to go do. I'm always curious of what gets people into the adaptive world, especially when you're not the one with the disability. I didn't
Yeah.
know any of this stuff existed until I was blind. And while I was in the hospital with a bullet hole in my forehead, they were like, hey, we know you can't find your way to the bathroom right now or even take care of yourself in the bathroom, but one day, if you want to, you'll be able to snowboard and do all the stuff that you
And
used to do.
let's
And
talk about paddling the Grand Canyon, right?
yeah, and
Yeah.
but that became something that I latched onto, but and I've even thought back to this in the years since, and especially as I was trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life, because everything that I'd wanted to do after I got out of the Marines was suddenly something that I couldn't do. But what I wanted to do professionally, and I became aware of rec rehab. I started looking into that, and I've been amazed that this whole world is out there that people don't know about. So how did you end up getting into it, especially as a full time an entrepreneur?
um, we've only, unless you want to spend 3 hours, I won't go all the way into the entire story.
Okay.
The way back view, and we can auger in as far as you want to go, is that I've always been a creator. I have a creative nature, but I lived a life of frustration, not knowing what to create. Like my mom would bring home a craft book to try to give me something to build, and it would say, "Take a toilet paper roll, put a piece of plastic over the end of it. You've made a telescope." No, I haven't. I've made a piece of crap that doesn't
Yep.
do anything. So it was always a frustration. I
But you
spent
had the longing to
I
make
had the
things.
longing. Yeah,
Okay.
I just didn't know. I didn't have the tools. Um, and there's a bigger point there too that I'll get into more later. Um, it wasn't the right time for me to create. It was time for me to learn. So I spent 5 years in the Air Force, right out of high school. I got out of the Air Force and spent most of a career in high speed microelectronics because that is what Mother Air Force and her wisdom put me in, even though I wanted to be in the band. So yeah, I get that, right?
God, if you could make the
Uh,
Air Force any softer, join the
oh
Air
yeah,
Force and go to the
exactly.
band.
That's right. I tried. I mean, the Marine Corps was going to send me to DC to audition because I was that good, and they said, "But do you have a degree, dude? I'm in high school."
But you
Ah,
were
yeah,
like,
never
no,
mind.
I can play mean skin flute, is what you told me.
Hey, now I was a trombone player. Leave me alone. It's
Okay.
bad enough I was in the marching band. Okay, stop it already, Marine. Um, I hold my head high. I heard your show. I know your dad was in the Air Force. Don't give me any crap.
Yeah, you should know I talk a lot of shit then, if
I
that's the
do.
case.
Yes, I'm
Okay.
building up to it.
But yeah.
I'm not gonna go full Bascus on you for about 20 minutes.
All right.
Um, we got to get to know each other a little better first. You understand?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Oh, yes, sir. I like that part. That was pretty cool.
So you, all in all, you got,
Okay, so back to what you asked me about. I'm sorry. So there's a longer story that goes into this, but the short story is that I started doing some design work on the side after we went full time building yoke pads. Do you know what a yoke pad is?
no, I saw that when I was researching you, and I was like, I can't. I mean, I'm assuming that's in my mind. I thought of something that like basically runs across your shoulder in your traps like a barbell would if you were squatting, but to carry a canoe.
Yeah, yeah. The
Okay.
yoke that's in the canoe is cut out to go around your neck.
Okay.
And some friends invited us to go to the Boundary Waters, and they had 85-pound Grumman canoes, and they said, "Yeah, we're going to carry these for miles through the woods over rocks because you can't use wheels." And I said, "What? No, I'm not." And I invented a backpack kind of frame that would carry a canoe more on my hips. And then it turned into a backrest in the canoe, and then it turned into a ground chair at the campsite. Uh, and a coworker saw that. I was still in electronics at the time. And she said, "Wow, you got to show my brother-in-law." And her brother-in-law is Mike Chickanowski from Winona Canoe, which is like the number two manufacturer of canoes uh, in the world, really. And I showed him, and he loved it, but didn't need it. And for the first time in my life, instead of putting my tail between my legs and going home, I said, "But what do you need?" And he said, "Better yoke pads." So yoke pads are something that goes between that wooden piece that sits on your trapezius muscle and causes intense pain, um, and the yoke. So it's just a cushion. It's a pad. And the one that I made has an aluminum frame, and it's like a sling instead of just a hunk of foam on a piece of wood. Um,
Yeah.
and all of a sudden, we were dominating the world in yoke pads, which means nothing unless you live in northern Minnesota or upstate New York. And I actually quit my day job because my kids were growing up. We've got six kids. And my kids were growing up assembling yoke pads in the living room at a nickel a piece when they were little. My one of my daughters, when she got to college, was actually making about $75 an hour before I figured it out. And said, "No more by the piece
Wow.
for you."
Yeah.
Uh, so I had quit my day job, and with the support of my spectacular wife Karen, who's I've been married to for 42 years, um, is it was like, okay, we can't do this all weekend, all night. We got to make a choice, and she was cool with it. It's like, let's go. Um, and Mike Chickanowski then came alongside because once October hits in Minnesota, all the water gets hard. And when the water gets hard, nobody goes canoeing and nobody buys yoke pads.
It's
So
wild how that works.
isn't it though? And and
Yeah.
it and it works that way from October till late May. Which yeah, first entrepreneurial lesson: don't do something seasonal.
Yeah. I
Uh,
lived in Michigan for a couple of years growing up, and dear
yeah, you
God,
get it.
the winters are hell.
Yeah, at least you have snow.
Yeah.
Um, God, it's just cold
It's
and
just the
long.
gray, man.
Yeah,
It's the six
exactly.
months of gray is so
Yep.
miserable.
The days get so short and so dark, and it just it wasn't as bad before, but I'm 65 now. I need my sunshine. Um, so anyway, when the water got hard, Mike said, "I've got a bunch of design work I would love to have done. Would you be willing to do some of that for the winter?" And I said, "Yes." So I started working on some designs that he was looking for, like new footrests on his canoes, a seat for his solo canoes that would tilt and raise and lower so you could kneel in it or sit in it, that kind of stuff. And it was fun work. It was, finally somebody gave me a challenge and said, "Here, I need this designed." And I would just work on it and charge him by the hour, which was my second great entrepreneurial lesson. Because that foot brace took me about 20 minutes to design. So I made maybe $30 on it. And if I had just said, "Give me a nickel for every one you put in a canoe," I might have
Yeah.
retired by now.
Royalties. Royalties is the
Yeah.
name of the game.
Oh, you learn things, and sometimes by skidding your face on it. But it got us through the tough winter. And he took me along to a show in Salt Lake City called Outdoor Retailers, where all of the major outdoor manufacturers go to display for all of the major dealers. So it's not a retail show. And he was showing off the new seat I had designed, and a gentleman rolled into the booth in a wheelchair. And he said, "Ooh, who designed that seat? Because I've been working on something that works kind of like that, except it doesn't work." And they said, "Well, Kevin did." So I met the guy in the booth, and his name is Peter Axelson. And Peter is kind of a legend. He did some of the first sit skis back in the 60s. Also an Air Force vet, has a small company that does SBIR research, phase one, phase two research.
What's
Uh,
SBIR?
I was afraid you're going to ask me that. It's one of those
But
Washington, D.C. acronyms that I have no idea what it means.
but
Small
so you
business.
don't know what he's doing?
Yeah, most of what he's doing now involves measuring the slope of sidewalks and trails, and he's very heavy into ADA kind of measurements and requirements.
Yeah, that
Um,
sounds so boring, but it's so important.
yeah,
So,
and he's so into it. I,
I,
you know,
as
it's
long as
like,
he's into it, that's what matters. If you can find something you can nerd out on,
oh, there you go.
yeah,
And people who nerd out on numbers, God bless them. Because wow, I'm a train wreck on numbers. Which when somebody says, "Oh, you're an engineer," I said, "Absolutely not. I couldn't calculate my way out of a wet paper bag." Um, but I do know how to invent.
yeah,
So anyway, Peter had this contract to develop a canoe seat for people with disabilities, and the seat that he had come up with was made out of aluminum pipe fittings and could be carried around in two big Rubbermaid totes with all the parts that it took to make it function. So I started consulting with him, and over a period of 2 years, redesigned what he was trying to accomplish in a way that really turned into something beautiful. Um, and I'll get more into the philosophy of design later, but it kind of goes to the anybody can invent a solution to a problem if the problem is defined clearly enough, but the art of it is in solving it simply. If you don't take that complicated thing that you came up with to solve the problem and refine it to the point where it gets simple, it's not done.
yeah, because two totes full of tubing and all these
Yeah,
joints, like that's not functional in any
yeah.
way.
If you go in the
And
back room of every engineering department in every college in the country, you find those projects.
where
Uh,
it's the
yep,
idea that you threw at the wall, it's your minimum viable product, and then it
yep.
just stops there. And
And
I
you made
want
it
to
work once, and you got your grade, and you left.
Yeah. I want to pause here for a second because I've been
Yeah.
curious this whole time and haven't had a good chance to ask you. Because I was, you know, I was expecting to, after having read about you and all and everything, first of all, I expected you to say that you were an officer and that you'd gone to school for engineering. And,
Ah,
but with that,
surprise.
yeah, with that, when, when you were in the Air Force, what did you say you were working at micro computer systems? Is that what you said?
No, it was worse than that because when I was in the Air Force, I worked on C-130s. So I
Oh, so it's
spent,
all avionics
yeah, I spent 8 years
computers.
or 5 years in avionics. Yeah, and
Oh,
back then the computers had vacuum tubes. You know what a vacuum tube is?
I know they used to be in the backs of old TVs, and and like
Yes,
old amps for like guitars and stuff like that.
yes. And troubleshooting meant kick the amp or shake the amp. So we would literally go into the instrument bay of a C-130 and just start shaking boxes until
Oh,
the needle moved on the gauge.
that's a perfect job for a junior enlisted airman. I mean,
It is.
that's perfect. All
Oh, it
right.
is. I mean, the compass, all right. If the compass was intermittent, the little thingy that sensed magnetic field is out on the tip of the wingtip on a C-130, which is like 20 feet up in the air. So you'd have to crawl out on the top of the wingtip and walk out to the end of the wing and start jumping up and down while somebody in the
Shake
cockpit
it
watched the
loose.
indicator. Yeah,
That's funny. All right. I can't remember what you had said, and I was picturing you working on some sort of computer systems, and I was like, I need to know what that
that
is.
came, yeah, that came later.
Okay.
Because when I got out of the Air Force, I went to work for Honeywell, um, which, if you haven't guessed by now, I'm old. Um,
Yeah, I saw you were in the Vietnam era. I saw
No,
that.
post Vietnam,
Oh, okay. Post
but
Nam.
pre anything else. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll give you the time frame. So when I was at Lackland in basic training, we were training alongside Iranians because the Shah was still in power. So Iranians were training at the Air Force Base in Lackland, right alongside of us. And by the time I left the Air Force in '82, they had taken hostages, and we looked really bad. So I'm in that weird peacetime veteran um, bracket that when I work, well, I'm sure we'll get into it more later, but I serve more now than I did then, in my opinion. So when I'm
That's
working around vets
wild.
that raised their hand and said, I know there's a war going on, put me in the Marines, um, I'm humbled to serve them.
I mean, I didn't go to combat. I deployed twice, but they were both peacetime deployments. But
Yeah,
so
but you still raised your hand. That's what people keep telling me is like, you still raised your hand. And I went, I came out of the Air Force with the old GI Bill, a dandy Italian bicycle, 400 record albums, and a killer stereo. I'm sorry, that doesn't get me free lunch on Veterans Day. Come on, stop. I've had all the pay I need for the service I rendered. It was the
I
same
didn't,
commitment, but just a time that was weird.
yeah, I didn't know that we were training the Iranians.
Oh yeah, yeah. Look it up because
That's
the Shah
crazy
was
to
our buddy.
think. I mean, 40 years later, and we're in a
Yeah,
proxy war with them. That
yeah,
is so wild.
yeah. Watch who you call your friends today because it doesn't take much.
Wow.
So yeah,
Well,
that was the big event while I was in, and I was actually stationed at Rhine Mine when the hostages got released. So they flew back to Rhine Mine on a C9 that I maintained and went to Wiesbaden for the hospital. And then I actually got to meet Jimmy Carter when he came to see them. So, that's one of those times in life where you go, okay, Jimmy Carter was probably the most decent human being to sit in the White House, but our our time in the military under him was rough.
hmm.
So
Yeah, that's why. I mean, I'm unfamiliar with that the whole thing. What under what like what were the circumstances under which they were taken?
so it was the American embassy in
Oh,
Tehran, and the
okay.
students rioted. The Shah had been overthrown. Um, was it Khomeini came into power at that point? I'm a terrible historian, but the students rioted, climbed the walls of the embassy, took everybody hostage, and it went on for a long
Okay. I
time.
think I think there's a Ben Affleck movie about that. I feel like I've seen like
Yeah,
now
I
that
think
you're
you're
saying
right.
that, that sounds familiar.
Yeah, and there
Okay.
was uh, there was a crash in the desert. One of our helicopters collided with the C-130, and a bunch of service members died. It was a horribly botched rescue mission, um, which that's it's. I have a great deal of veterans guilt about what we were because today's U.S. military would not have had that happen. Um, but you know, there you go. That's what it was. And don't hear me wrong. I am spectacularly proud to have served, and I would do it again in a heartbeat. And I grew up a lot in those 5 years. I was a E5 staff sergeant when I got out. I saw the world. I taught Army combat units winter survival in the Alps. So there was a lot personally that I can trace back to my Air Force days and say there was a piece of who I am um, beginning to grow right there.
Yeah.
And I'd have been a train wreck at college because I wasn't that kid.
That's something I really try and impress upon people is like even I know someone who's a couple of years younger than me who's I'm like see where he's at. And I'm like, man, you benefit so much from going in the military. Obviously, I don't want to be the person who's like, hey, you should go talk to a recruiter. So I don't say anything, but I do when I have a chance to talk to young people, especially like kids in high school, where it's like, hey, you don't have to go the college path, and even if you do, you can delay that. And he's like that. Like I knew I was going to go into the military my entire life. I didn't know if I was going to go to college first or enlist, but same thing where it turned out, hey, I didn't feel that I was ready for college yet, and I enlisted, and it really did. It formed me as a human being. It especially as a young man. I mean, those are some crucial years, and you really do. You learn strategies that will carry you forward in successful ways for the rest of your life.
Right.
Obviously,
And that doesn't stop.
yeah,
My folks, I was the oldest of five, and there was no way they could afford to send me to college. I was making a buck 80 at the hardware store, so it's not like I was saving a lot of money for college. And halfway through my senior year of high school, I enlisted because the GI Bill was available and it was going out at the end of 1976. So I enlisted halfway through my senior year and went delayed entry in July of 77 just to get the GI Bill.
they were going to get rid of it entirely.
They did. And the GI
Whoa.
Bill that I got was unlimited.
That's
So,
interesting because that's what it's like now with the post 9/11. You mean in terms of like it doesn't expire time wise?
right.
Yeah.
And that all changed during my service. So the old GI Bill, we're talking Vietnam era GI Bill, was basically, yeah, you go to college as long as you want. Um, in the state of Illinois, where I grew up, the state had a benefit for veterans that said you can go tuition free to any Illinois state school,
Oh,
period.
okay. Yeah, I misunderstood what you said. That's not how that is not how the GI Bill is now. I thought you meant because like for a while there was like, hey, if you don't use this within 4 years, then like you lose all the
Right.
benefits or whatever it was. But that
So the
is
old
crazy.
the old GI Bill was unlimited. While I was in the service, that changed.
Okay.
So they changed it, and this is still the old Montgomery GI Bill. They changed it so that you had 10 years to use the GI Bill. And oh, by the way, it starts now.
Yeah. They
So by the
still let
time
you go ahead.
by the time I got out of the service, I think I had 9 years left to use it. And I extended a year to go to Germany. So I had enlisted for 4. I extended for a 5th year to go to Germany. And during that 5th year, the governor of Illinois got rid of the program and made it uh, work in reverse. So I lost that benefit by extending a year.
That's interesting. They still let you buy into the Montgomery GI Bill instead of the post 9/11. Like it's still
Yeah, I didn't have to
around.
buy anything.
Oh, okay.
Back then, it was a benefit. It was a huge
Okay.
benefit. And here's the killer of it all: I never got a degree.
Well, and that's I was going to ask you the next thing because
Yeah,
it didn't sound like it, and I may have misspoken there on the buying into it, but they at least let you choose the Montgomery GI Bill. But I think you do have to pay
I
into it if
think
I
you do have
remember
to pay
correctly.
in.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's a pay-in
Uh,
system now that is. It went completely away for a while, and then they brought it back.
Okay.
Changed.
Well,
Uh,
and since I derailed this conversation wildly and way more than I meant to, I want to bring this back. You were talking about the philosophy of design
yeah.
and alluded to the fact that you would maybe expand upon that. And I'm curious. I'm a tinkerer,
Yeah.
and now I tinker with software. But
Yep.
it's, I found that's my medium where I really do. I get this my creative fix out of that.
Oh,
And especially I used to draw and stuff like that when I could see, and it's filled that void for me. But in a physical sense, when you're creating, what is to you, what are these principles and
yeah.
go for it.
It's an absolute gift. Okay, I'll say that flat out, I count this as a gift. Um, because I, so there's two tracks here that I'd like to take you down. One of the tracks is do whatever's in front of you because it's teaching you something you're going to need. I believe that wholeheartedly. If a career counselor looked at my career, he would use it as an example of what not to do. Okay, I had a disaster of a career. Never worked more than 7 years in one place. I moved up and went place to place, but it was all a jumble. I worked at the Mayo Clinic in research. It ended badly. I got out of engineering and just did handyman work for widows for a piece of pie and a cup of coffee. Um, Back into electronics, came out of, did yoke pads. It was a mess. But every one of those pieces adds up to what I'm doing today. Each one of those things taught me something that I had to know that I couldn't have gone to school and chosen from a curriculum. So it takes time to get to this place.
I think there's an asterisk required with all that because it sounds like if there's some people that will lean into that and use that as an excuse to piss their life away, as opposed to like applying that towards something meaningful. And from what I read, there were about you researching, there's more than you were just going and bouncing between jobs. I mean, you were going
Oh
through
no,
some
yeah,
stuff. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, there was stuff.
Yeah.
Um, but in all of those things, when you're in a field like engineering, and I worked my way up into being an engineer without having a piece of paper, that's brutal. That's hard work. Um, and in 1982, nobody was hiring veterans for the sake that they were veterans. Being a vet didn't even get you lunch in
Oh,
1982.
I mean, people hated veterans at that point.
They hated it, and it gave me no credit whatsoever. Honeywell hired me as a pre-entry level technician and said, if you go to the community college and get a 2 year degree, at which point I would have had 5 years in the Air Force in avionics, 2 years at Microswitch, and 2 year degree, then they would hire me as an entry level tech. So the fact that I clawed my way up into full on engineering and research companies tells you how hard I worked at it.
Well, and that's what I mean, where that asterisk is required.
Yeah.
You were applying yourself towards the pursuit of something bigger and a higher goal. And it sounds like
Yep.
probably relentlessly because,
Relentlessly in a totally non-linear way, in a way that nobody would go after deliberately.
but even, I
But
mean, if
beautiful.
you, yeah, and if you have to look back now, I mean, how much character did that instill in you and almost like inject into you through the trial by fire of it all? I mean,
Oh,
those
bunches
are,
and bunches.
yeah, like
Yeah,
you said, those
every
are, that's invaluable.
every piece of it. So by the time this came around, all of the groundwork was laid. We, uh, when I mentioned I had 6 kids before, our youngest, Jamie, is 24 and has Down syndrome. So you and I have something else to talk about. Uh, but in the meantime, my wife stayed home with the kids, and she was a special ed teacher before we had kids. So all of this uh, really took some brutal turns, some really rough stuff. I tell people the story that at one point when I was doing the handyman work, we had 4 kids at the time, uh, and we had no money, none. We would go to a state park on the weekend to hike a different trail and mark the trail off, and then we'd buy a Kit Kat bar because we could break it in 4 pieces, and each kid got a piece. So we know how hard it can be when you get those kind of shots in life.
What
Um,
year-ish was this?
Mid late 80s,
Okay.
late 80s, early 90s.
So you guys are still really young.
Yeah, but
Okay.
well, we got a lot older in those 2 years.
Yeah, I would
Um,
imagine.
yeah, there was a lot that happened there that wouldn't take a whole nother episode to talk about. But basically, I had lost my job at Mayo. in a way that was brutal. And we lost two babies in 2 years.
Jesus.
And I was doing handyman work, fixing drippy faucets. Although I was so good at it that I had quite the widow network. You can imagine the widow network in a town of 2,000 people. So the widow
Probably real
across
tight
this,
knit.
yeah, yeah, the word spread really fast. I learned customer service in those 2 years, uh, in a great way, because I would get a call from the widow lady across the street, Mrs. Boo, and she'd say, Kevin, my faucet's dripping. I said, how often does it drip? How long does it take a drip to fall? 10 minutes. So she's staring at her faucet, waiting for it to
Yeah.
drip, to call me to come over and have conversation and fix her drip.
And you're like,
Um,
I'll plug it for you.
yeah, you know, uh, and those were amazing 2 years because the oil jar never went dry. It was amazing. We survived on $10,000 with four kids and didn't lose anything. Um, so those were miraculous years to us. And so much of that we learned and that we learned as a family that made us close as a family translated into what this has become, in such a way that I couldn't be who I am today without those years.
And that's such a beautiful little piece of the story. I think especially someone's going to hear this who lost their business over the course of COVID from the shutdowns and be like, still probably reeling in the wake of that and their fiscally their life, and I guess even more so than just fiscally, their life could be in shambles right now. But someone else might hear that and be like, all right, we can get back to square one and start fresh and see where this goes again. But
And it's going to take time, and that horrific thing you just went through is going to play a role. Um, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Yeah, okay. That's great if you actually get stronger. It's not so great if it really kicks your butt.
well, and that comes down to how you in the long run are able to look at it. Right? Like you
Exactly.
could absolutely be bitter for the rest of your life, or after you've had time to grieve that and deal with. I mean, I would if I was someone who lost my restaurant or my family's restaurant because I was forced to shut my business down for a fucking hoax for a couple of years. I mean, I would be filled with rage. So I'm not saying this as if it's easy, but if you're able to eventually come to terms with that and look past that, that will light a fire in you to rebuild bigger than it was before.
100%. But there's also things to be learned and watched in the process. For example, when I was doing the handyman job, we had a minivan, of course, like one of the first Plymouth Voyagers. I had a 5-speed, uh, and the tires were bald, and it was winter in Minnesota, and my wife was worried about it. And we went to church one Sunday, and there was an envelope in our mailbox with a gift certificate for four tires, and we never knew who did it. And we go out and get into the car, and there's a frozen turkey in the front seat, and we never knew who did it. People just kept anonymously helping us. And I was raised to thank people. If somebody gives you something, you go out of your way to find them and say, thank you for doing that. And those experiences taught us who those gifts came from, and it wasn't a person. So it leaves you thankful to the one that gave it to you. And it was another one of those deep, meaningful times that said that we don't despair, right? Even though things looked pretty rough. Um, and over the next period of 10 years, um, the next electronics job came. I couldn't do handyman work anymore because I developed rheumatoid arthritis and I couldn't get up and down off the floor at 45. And I went back in electronics. And when those yoke pads happened and I left, that's when the real beauty started unfolding because in all those years, I had learned how to use two-dimensional CAD. Back then it was AutoCAD. so I could make flat drawings.
Yeah.
And when I started working on this canoe seat, I would actually draw a shape, print it out on paper, put spray adhesive on it, stick it on a piece of MDF board, cut it out on a bandsaw, and do that in layers until I had created a 3D shape. And then I would take it down
Wow.
to the canoe plant and put it on the thermoformer and form a piece of plastic around that shape, bring it back to the shop, cut it out, drill the holes, go through the whole process of building what it was I was imagining, and then find out it didn't work. So the process took like 3 weeks to get to the place where you go, well, crap, that didn't work. And then you change it and go through the whole process over again.
Still, though, I would love to watch that.
Yeah, you would.
I'm
You
sure
really would. Yeah.
be obviously frustrating for you, but I would love to just be a fly on the wall and get to watch that. I like and be in that shop and be like, all right, what is this thing doing? How is it doing it? And just yeah.
And the beauty of it is I could see it in my mind. Okay, that's the gift. If my wife and I talk and I try to describe to her what I'm seeing in my mind, she she uses words. She's a words person, but I see things. Yeah, sounds like a horror movie. Um,
No, but I get it. You're picturing these things in your mind. Like you have a clear
exactly. And
vision.
how do you hold it? Well, in the last 20 years, technology has changed so much, and I picked things up and I learned SolidWorks, which is three-dimensional CAD
It's
drawing.
another design software.
Yeah, it's a design software. It's like 15,000 bucks a seat. And I actually, there's a young guy by the name of Bobby Luczynski, who's the son of a friend of mine who's involved in adaptive sports in New England. And he designs skis. He designs mono skis and bi skis out in Denver. Great guy. And I actually hired him to come work for me for 2 weeks in the ski off season so that he could turn all of my two-dimensional drawings into three-dimensional drawings. And while he was there, I wanted him to teach me how to do it.
I was gonna say
So,
that's another thing. I would nerd out on that,
yep,
man. That is so cool.
I'm like, Bobby, you come and work for me. I'm going to watch over your shoulder. I'm going to learn everything you're doing so that when you go back home, I'm going to sit down at that $15,000 investment and know how to do it. And I watched him and I nodded and I went, yep, 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 yep. And Bobby left and I sat down and went, can't do it. Ah, it looked so easy when he was doing it. I can't do it. And I was just frustrated. And my son-in-law came for Christmas that year and I expressed my frustration to him. I just blew 15,000 on a CAD program that I can't use. And he said, SolidWorks? I took that in college. What do you want to know? I said, I don't want to know anything. I'm going to sit down and grab the mouse and you're going to tell me what to do. And I physically did it while he told me what to do. And that clicked,
And
you
that's
know,
when
and
you let him marry your daughter.
yeah, no, that's when I got glad that he married my daughter.
Yeah.
No, that's not true, Peter. Really, it's not. I loved you from the start, dude.
He's lying, Peter. He was talking shit
Yeah.
about you before we started.
It's not true.
No, it's not.
Uh, so that changed everything though. And see, even then I was still learning how to learn. There's
It's a
people
valuable
get
skill.
reached differently. Yeah. And if you sat me in a classroom in a lecture, boy, there better be a window in the room or I'm going out. I'm going to sleep because I cannot sit there and listen to somebody drone on with words.
I think
But
that's
it's
the case with creative people a lot.
it is very much. And this is a huge lesson from the last 65 years of my life is that when you if I was in high school right now, I would be diagnosed ADD and I would be put on Ritalin because my brain doesn't go in a straight line the way people need you to go in a straight line.
To
Creative
work an
minds
office job.
to
Like
work an
that's
office job
yeah.
or even a creative job. What I saw in electronics was when I had a creative task to do, they would say, here's the task, and here's the schedule, and here's the deadline. And here are the mileposts, and you're going to meet those mileposts along the way. And if you don't, we're going to need an answer for why you didn't. And you go after that design and you hit a wall that goes, I don't know what to do next. I don't know. I can't fix this. And you're struggling and beating on it. And they say it's the deadline. It's got to be met. And you end up creating junk to meet the deadline because the inspiration didn't happen. And as soon as I went out on my own, this was massive. As soon as I got into my own environment, in my own shop, under my own deadlines, what I found was I could work on 12 projects at once. And I would go with what was actively creating and say, wow, this is great. Look, go, 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 go. And bam, I'd hit a wall and the design would stop. And I learned to put that design down, walk away, and go to the next one. And I can do this with 12 things at once. So if you would watch, if my wife watches me work in the shop, it drives her insane. If we clean a room, she starts in one corner and goes all the way down that wall, all the way down the next wall, all the way down the next wall. I go bing, 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 bing across the room 30 times in random directions. And it takes us the exact same amount of time and we clean the room equally well, which she would probably argue
She'd
the
probably
same
argue
about.
that, but
Yeah.
yeah.
We might have a difference of opinion on that, but I think it's equally well.
I think that's a huge issue with the education system, and it's hard. I
Massive.
mean, I can say it's an issue, but I don't have a great solution for it either. So that's
The
not much
problem
help.
is that spills into industry. So that expectation that is set in the education world follows on into industry and it's creating huge problems. Not
Well,
only that, but then you go into something creative and the path forward is to go into management so that the better you get at what you do, the less you do it and the more you're managing people, which is a gift of its own that
yeah,
has
and
nothing to do with creativity.
you've gotten away from what really got you there in the first place.
Yeah. And you're doing the job of someone who could be a brilliant manager, but doesn't get the chance because they haven't come up the way you're supposed to. So there's so much to be learned and changed about how things happen. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that Ritalin never has a use or that my story is the way it is. It's just the way it ended up working for me. But
ADD and ADHD are absolutely overdiagnosed. Obviously,
totally.
folks, I'm not a fucking doctor, but just because
Yeah.
just because the one way that schools are presented to people in the United States isn't working for your kid doesn't mean that they need to be on a drug for the rest of their life. Think about the
Bingo.
fact that now this lifelong medication is making the same companies that just made a fuckload of money off of the pandemic a
There
bunch
you
more
go.
money for the rest of your life. Like that's the driving force behind a lot of that stuff.
And ultimately, what it's doing is training your mind to not be creative. It's drugging the creativity out of these young minds
Well,
because
and
they can't figure out how to manage it. And it's tough to manage. It's a lot to learn.
yeah, and if you don't get, like you said, if you don't get a chance to figure out, okay, this is how my brain works, then you're not going to know how to capture that as an adult. And it's funny that you with the wandering thing, that's how I am with writing and with code. Like I just finished the second draft of my book, but with coding, it's very I have to meander, and it's a lot of times I have to put stuff on the back burner, and I will get to a stopping point and really analyze, like, okay, what am I stuck on here? What have I tried? And then, all right, now I'm going to go work out. And an hour into my workout, I'll have been passively thinking about this, and then an idea will come into my head, or when I'm in the shower, and it's the same way with writing.
I love the shower. And I wasn't
It's the
going to go
best.
there because I don't want people to have that image, because it's not a good image. Um, but the shower is so awesome.
Yeah.
Um, because you're isolated, it's warm. That's as far as I'll take it. But it's a great place. God speaks to me in the shower. It comes right there. The second best creative location to the shower?
Uh,
Nebraska.
because there's nothing to look at
Serious.
when you're driving
Because there's
through.
nothing to do but drive. And man, by the time you drive under that freaky museum thing over the interstate, Nebraska is just fantastic. If the state police ever develop a probe that they can put on your head, I will be arrested for distracted driving because the whole time I'm driving, I'm rolling ideas around. And I mean physically, like I can make it function and see what doesn't work and alter the design and watch it function and alter it again. And by the time I get home, it's like, get out of my way. I got to go to the shop. So it once once I reached an age where that tool was available to me, where I was mature enough to understand how the brain was working and to not be so frustrated when an idea goes cold for a bit and just walk away because the solution comes in an instant and it's a eureka moment and you go running to push it to the next wall.
And a lot of times it does come through switching gears like that
It
for
does. Yep.
whatever. I don't know what that is. I think it's that maybe allows you to come at it from a different angle instead of getting pissed off at whatever angle you're
Yeah.
stuck on. But
Yep.
very
And so
interesting.
much of this is really becoming more self-aware and understanding how your own brain works. I would never claim to say I could go into a high school classroom and find those struggling kids and say, hey, do this. This is what works. It's what worked for me.
But
And
these
it took a lot
conversations,
longer than 18. We
yeah,
expect a kid to know that at 18. And I'm serious sitting here at 65, still learning.
these
And
conversations though do that in a sense. And maybe it's yeah, it's not so direct, but the a creative process isn't direct. And so a 18-year
right.
old might hear this and again, back to that conversation of okay, this dude didn't go to college, but he's found his path. And I just talked about this with a guy that I had on a couple days ago. I think he'll be 2 episodes before you, but we talked about the role that really like and the value of finding true purpose, whatever your purpose
Yes.
is, and how again it might be a meandering path to get there. And I think it probably more often than not is, and that's why so many people miss that and wind up working the job that they don't want because they thought that that is what they were supposed to do was to go to school and get your undergrad in business and
Yep.
go work in sales at Microsoft selling Excel licenses for 40 years and
Yep.
hating every moment of it.
Yep.
But
But there's also such a difference. Okay. So e- the beauty of what I know about the creative process gets balanced with the fact that I have to run a business because I am not a businessman. I'm not an entrepreneur. I've survived it 20 years, so I don't suck at it, but I'm not good at it. And it's hard, hard work. If I had stayed at Honeywell and retired, and my brother Dan retired from State Farm because he put in his 39 years. I couldn't have survived that world for 39 years if my life depended on it. But to be in the world that I'm in, I have this glorious reward of seeing ideas happen and having them change people's lives in front of my face. But it comes at a price too, because, to be in business, especially these days, forgive me, but you got to have the balls of an elephant.
yep,
Um,
it's I mean,
and a wife that, oh, I could not do this without Karen because she keeps me level because my goodness, the swings are intense. And the tight times, and it goes in cycles every year. This is a tight time of the year. Always is, it's going to get better, but for now, you hold your breath a little bit. And for her to do this with me for 42 years, wow, I am so in awe of her. And it just changes everything. because that balance always happens. You can't just whistle through life going, I do great things and this is fun.
Yeah, well, and you don't appreciate when it is fun if it's always fun. That
Yeah.
becomes your baseline. Like
You
you
don't
don't
appreciate the Rockies if you haven't driven through Nebraska.
exactly. And then you're like,
Yeah.
man, I would do anything to be out of this shithole. Um, sorry, Nebraska. But
And then you get to drive through Tennessee and go,
yeah,
wow, why doesn't everybody live here?
I meant to ask you earlier because your wife was a special education teacher.
Yeah.
Joe was a special education teacher. Is that how you
Yeah.
guys met?
Nope.
Oh, okay.
Nope.
Just a strange coincidence.
Yeah. There are types of people who do certain kinds of jobs who I really like them. So, my favorite people right now is anybody whose title ends in therapist. Um,
That works. Yeah.
and I
Valuable
mostly
to
mean
people.
physical, okay?
Yeah.
Um, because that's my world. That's my jam is the physical, is the mechanical. Um, but what? A real quick side story, and I have no idea how we're doing on time, and I'm sure you'll tell me when it's time to cut it off. But when I got out of the service, okay, I was an E5. I was a big shot, and I had to move back into my parents' basement in the town of 26,000 and go to a community college. I'd been around the world, man,
For
and
your
this
not even entry level job that you were going to be given.
exact no, I didn't even get that job yet.
Oh,
I was driving a liquor truck and I was a lunchroom monitor at a grade school.
oh God.
That's how bad it was. And man, if you haven't been a lunchroom monitor for first graders, you haven't lived. And in that disaster, I went out to the community college to sign up for courses, and there was this tall blonde in front of me. And no kidding, I said, do I know you? Was not a pickup line because she kind of looked like the girl that I grew up next door to. And she turned around and said, well, I've been here about 5 years. And I said, well, I've been gone for 5 years, and walked away. And
Nice.
it was my wife on the worst day of her life, standing in line at the college, trying to take courses to forget about everything else that was going to pot in the handbasket for her. We met, and her mother watched it happen and went, "Oh, what wonders God hath wrought." I mean, she was like, "Oh, this has got to be right." And 6 months later, we got married, and that was 42 years ago. So, in a flash, you go from your parents' basement to meeting the woman of your dreams.
And
It changed my life.
with sweet game like that, saying, man, I've been gone for five
Oh,
years. Bye. Like
yeah.
there's hope
I
out there,
was
kids.
Oh, I was so dumb about it. And she ended up walking her dog past my parents' house because she lived like a block away. And handed my little sister a piece of paper with her phone number on it. Said, "Tell your brother to call me," because she knew a teacher that lived across the street from my parents. She just went through the whole FBI thing.
Small world.
And the coolest part is that I'm the oldest of five. Well, there was a big gap, and the three youngest were still in grade school at the grade school that I went to, that she was the teacher at for special ed. And
Huh.
my brother and two sisters, understand, my youngest sister is 20 years younger than me.
That's mine. My youngest sister is what, 22 years younger than I am.
Yeah, my mom's 20 years older, my sister's 20 years younger, and same parents. And those three kids got famous because their brother was dating the hot teacher.
Nice.
So, you can imagine that. It's like, yeah, yeah, my brother's dating her.
Yeah, yeah, they'd
Oh,
be
it
the
was pretty
studs.
cool.
That's so
Yeah.
funny.
So,
Wow.
boy, we
42
just went on a
years.
wild loop, didn't we?
We did go on a loop, but that's
I
fine.
apologize.
No, you're fine. I never know where these are going to go. And I
Oh,
just appreciate letting it roll. And then I try and bring them on track when need be, but that was a
when
short
there's a
one.
track to be had.
Well, you were
Yeah.
talking about how lucky you were that in the context or keeping in mind that you have this mind that you've learned wanders and that's just how it needs to work that you have business in the construct of business to kind of keep you on the rails is really
Yeah.
where
Yep.
somehow we wound up on, oh, because then you started talking about how your wife has supported you through it. So it all ties together.
Yeah.
But
The real beauty of it is that in the work that I've been blessed to do, you're I love listening to people tell me what doesn't work, you know? From a, what do you need? Steve Bascus, okay? Steve and I were at an event in Montrose, Colorado, years ago. And I had come up with a hand adaptation. That's a thing that goes across the back of your hand that helps your hand stay on the paddle, right?
mhm.
And Steve was telling you about his left hand,
Yep.
and he can't grasp that paddle because his hand just doesn't close right. And we were sitting in an archery range, bored to tears, just having a talk about that. And he said, what if you took that hand adaptation and used two of them and put one behind my fingers and one behind the back of my hand? And I went, that's brilliant. And it worked for him. It worked great. And I've been teaching people that ever since because he took the time to say, this doesn't work. What if this? And it brought it back around to where I realized all I'm doing is filling a toolbox for people
But
and
that's
giving
so
them
valuable.
tools. Yeah, it's a great place to be.
You're the force equalizer there.
Yeah. And then I get to go watch people use it, listen to them talk. The summer sports clinic in San Diego, which is where Joe and I got to know each other the best. Wow. I mean, we serve over 100 vets in 4 days, putting them on the water through the sand. And everything that I've ever invented came from San Diego because I would drive out there. It's 4 days out, 4 days back with 5 days of working with people hand on, hand to hand, eye to eye, put them on the water, listen to what sucks, which is really hard to do when you have an engineer's ego. You
Yeah.
got to learn to hear it sucks and not get offended by that.
Yeah.
And then come back after lunch and fix it on the spot. It's like triage on the sand. And then be able to take that and drive through Nebraska and say, by the time I get home, I can fix that. Just what an incredible experience. And to be serving my fellow vets and actually changing something, take someone, I don't know how many people I've talked to that they'll be paddling a kayak. I remember one at the winter sports clinic in the pool, um, which I don't get me going on Lonnie Bedwell yet.
No, I'm
But
gonna we're like an hour in. I'm gonna keep us on track
yeah,
now.
okay. I'll bring it in for a landing. Um, and see, as soon as I said Lonnie Bedwell, I lost my train of thought because I am that old.
Well,
So
you were
having
talking.
those pieces land together, and change lives. You see a guy in the pool in Aspen, paddling independently, and he looks at you and says, "This is the most independence I've had since I fell off the roof."
Well, and I was about to say, I with as someone, that someone I had lost everything after I shot myself. My getting my independence back was the biggest driving factor between everything that I did, and also the biggest, the uh, biggest change in my life after losing my sight was getting it back. And after that came refining my identity and my purpose. But you cannot understand the impact of your independence until you've lost it. And so you being able to give that to people is such a beautiful thing.
It is, and to be able to witness it, because when I'm sitting in my shop in Minnesota in the middle of the winter and not doing it, it's so much harder because you don't get to see that aha moment that says, "Wow, there it is." That's why we do this. So there are so many of those moments over the last 20 years. I can't even tell you. It's been absolutely amazing.
You ever thought about writing about it?
Yeah, if I ever had time.
Well, yeah, that's fair. It sounds
Wait a
like
minute, I'll
so.
put down my beer and I'll go do that.
Yeah.
I would love
Well,
to. My dad was a copywriter and a man of words, and he passed away last year from cancer. And
ah, man.
it's been so hard because the words are in there thanks to him. And yeah, maybe someday when I retire, right? I say that with you can hear the smile on my face
Yeah, I
when
was
I
gonna
say
say
when I retire.
you've got the mind. I don't think you'll ever retire because you'll always you can't like you're
I
not gonna
won't.
stop tinkering with things.
Nope. Karen looked at me and said, "You need a hobby." I said, "I my job is my hobby. I
Yeah.
love what I do."
If you're passionate about it,
Uh,
man, that's all that matters.
Retirement is when you do what you love for no money. So, which means I retired 20 years ago.
That's
So
awesome, man.
I'm happily retired. So yeah,
I
I'd love to write someday, but yeah, when
well, I think you should think about it because I mean, I think not only would it be interesting, but I also think just tying this back to what we've touched on a couple times and what I think might be the most impactful, at least for young people that might hear this, is again, you don't that those wandering paths are okay. It doesn't have to be a college degree. Again, asterisk if that wandering path, if you are wandering and going outside of the box in pursuit of something meaningful in a a definitive way that's not you making excuses for yourself. That is, there are other paths out there, and part of this process, especially of growing and maturing. I'm 29 now, and I feel like I finally have an understanding of myself and how my mind works and what drives me, and that's a process. And I think people need to know that. But I think you explaining that with the very specific mind in the way that your mind works, I think could be very impactful for people outside of all the stories that I'm sure you could throw in there and people would love to
oh
hear.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I just put everybody to sleep except for the two or three people. But I like to tell people I'm 65 and I know what I want to be when I grow up. It's a cool
Yeah, I
feeling.
think you pretty sure you said those exact words in your email to me when I was trying to get
Probably.
more background information. Well,
I don't have a lot of fresh material.
no, that's awesome though. Where you got anything big that you're working on right now that you want to mention?
Yeah, something huge, huge. So I'll keep this brief, but the first 10 years of doing this, I was working on getting paddlers to be able to paddle their own boat. And then I spent 12 weeks in physical therapy for impinged shoulders because I was transferring people and I got hurt, which you do if you transfer people. So I started working on making transfers better to get from a wheelchair into a kayak. Got that. From a wheelchair into a hand cycle. Got that now. So that's the new thing. This is the first thing I've done outside of paddle sports. And what I've come up with is going to be so cool. We've already got the portable version. Programs are using it all over the country for hand cycling. I've got a lightweight version for fall assist in the house. But the really cool thing is going to be rotomolded like playground equipment and mounted at the trailhead of every bike trail in the country so that someone can transfer out of their wheelchair into their hand cycle and take off down the trail
Wow.
independently.
What is it called and where can people find it?
It's called the Sidestep, and it's on our website on creatingability.com, and it's coming. You'll see the stuff that's out there is out there, but I'm really excited about this. I feel like I'm with this where I was with kayaking 20 years ago, so I guess I better live to 85.
That's awesome. It's funny because when you had mentioned the summer sports clinic, here I was expecting that answer to be like, no, I'm waiting for the summer sports clinic to come around, so I have ideas. But that's so exciting, man.
No, last year I actually got to be on the seating and prosthetics team with the VA, and went to all the venues and worked on transfers. And oh, there's so much cool stuff going on.
Wow. That's
So
awesome,
yeah,
man. I'm excited for you.
Yeah, there's no end to it. I've already seen all 48 states doing the kayaking thing. It's just I need a way to get to Hawaii and Alaska yet.
Sea kayaking and bear hunting kayaking.
Yeah. I wonder if my Sprinter van will float.
Yeah. Well, awesome, man. You said creatingability.com.
Yep, that's right.
Okay. Anything else? Are you looking to hire people? Anything else you want to announce?
Oh, I tell you what, how about somebody buys the company and runs it the way it should be run and just hires me on as a creative consultant?
There we go.
There you
Pe-
go.
People know how to find you.
Yeah, go to the website, get my phone number, call me, we'll talk.
All right.
Uh,
Awesome.
but
I,
seriously, anybody, I love the conversations. That's why you go to the website and don't see prices or a click here to buy because you can't. You have to have a conversation with me.
I love
So
that.
we've always been that way, and I just refuse to do it any differently because I gotta hear your story. I gotta know what you're doing and what you want to do and what doesn't work. Um, and that's part of the love of the job. So sorry, we're not Amazon, but we can do some pretty cool
Yeah,
stuff.
that's awesome. Well, thanks for, I know you said you don't do interviews, so thanks for taking the time to come on here and share your story because
Thanks
this
for having
is,
me.
people need to hear it.
I appreciate it, and I hope I didn't put anybody to sleep.
Thanks everyone at home for listening to another episode of Going In Blind. Remember, if you haven't already, please rate and review the show wherever you listen, and then share this around with someone who needs to hear it.
Everybody needs to hear it.